Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're so glad that you joined us today. My name is Mitch Ashley. I'm Principal and GM of Techstrong Research. We've got a great topic here, modernizing mainframes and mid-range platforms. The time is now. And two great guests, two great speakers today. I do want to just cover a little bit of housekeeping. We're so glad that you've joined us, and we are recording this, so you can just kind of kick back and participate either in chat or just listen and soak in the information, because you'll get a link to a recording afterwards. We'll also share the slide information with you. And, we have a Q&A coming up at the end of things. So please hang in there with us, and we will kind of get to that Q&A portion. So we're also giving away 4 gift cards that will happen at the end of the webinar. So hang tight for that, and you may be one of the winners. So we're going to get right to our topic. I have a great pleasure of introducing both Howard Hinman with AWS and Joel Rosenberger with Accenture. Joel, why don't you introduce yourself, and then if you would hand it to Howard, we'll just jump right into the topic.
Perfect. Thanks, Mitch. Appreciate that. And so I'm Joel Rosenberger with Accenture. I'm part of the AWS business group at Accenture. And so my focus is really around mainframe modernization. So helping both our clients and from that, and working very closely with AWS, and especially Howard. And I'll hand it over to you, Howard, to kick us off.
Thanks, Joe. And I'm Howard Hinman. I'm the Global Principal PDM for AWS in our AABG team, which is our Amazon Accenture business group. And I focus on mainframe modernization worldwide with Accenture. I'm former chief technologist of mainframe modernization for Micro Focus, and had a similar role for Microsoft years ago. So one of those old guys that's been around for quite a while. So why don't we jump in here a little bit? I'm going to take us to our next slide here. So why are mainframes and mid-range systems still relevant after all these years? And I think there's a number of reasons. One of the things that we're finding is that while the mainframe market and the mid-range market is decreasing with the advent of the cloud, and even before that with on-premise data centers and such, we're seeing that a huge upswing or uptick in people now coming to us wanting to move away from these platforms. And there's a couple reasons I'll get into, but we can see that on this slide that 100% of the top insurers are still using these platforms. Banks, the airlines have them. So we find them quite often. I was in a Costco a couple weeks ago and went over to Corey the hot dog and looked down, and there were 3 mainframe terminals there. So, we just see them everywhere. Sometimes we're not aware that they're in our life. I had somebody one time tell me that you cannot order a hot dog without having a mainframe involved, and there I was living it, by the way.
So was it a green screen 3270? Do you?
It was. In fact, it was, what was even more fascinating was it was a Micro Focus terminal emulator. It was running. So I looked down and saw my old company and the green screen. Yep. So
you'll see those quite frequently. Yeah, 3270 terminals or 5250 terminals or those types of things.
Absolutely. So one of the things here, this article that I came across some weeks back has a really good comment here, and it says basically that according to research, the mainframe modernization services market is estimated to grow from 23.5 billion in 2021 to 108 billion by 2031. So a lot of companies have already started their journey or are trying to figure out how to kind of untangle this and come up with the strategies for how to attack that. And we're going to dig a little bit more in later, and particularly Joel's going to talk about some of the ways that Accenture approaches that with AWS as well. And we have a little thing over here about the Accenture banking survey that was done again that talks about percentages of usage in the marketplace and such. And we've got a little more information in this slide deck, by the way, than we're going to talk about, just so you can download this and have access to some of the more detailed information. So as I move through here, Accenture did a survey And their clients actually, they asked them, what are your challenges on the mainframe? And a lot of things when we talk about mainframe, we're also talking about mid-range challenges as well for those that have mid-range. We are going to focus quite a bit here on IBM's AS400 or I-Series platform. That seems to be the most common mid-range that we come across, but we'll have a few comments about other platforms here as well a little bit later, such as AIX and some Unix platforms and such that people are moving to AWS, and Accenture has practices to help clients do this. So when we look at the challenges, and these are probably not surprising to a lot of you that are on the call, but number one is the high cost of operations. The mainframe and mid-range market continues to get more expensive. IBM's been upping their yearly charges. The third-party software vendors, as this market's kind of imploding, they're trying to squeeze revenues out of this. And we're getting reports from some of our clients that some of the third-party software companies are upping their charges by as much as 400%. And that's making people go back budgeting-wise and trying to determine how to encompass this. It's kind of an ugly surprise. So again, also the mainframe is kind of a closed platform. The mainframe has been extended. IBM's done some good things over the years of the mainframe. AS400 is a bit more of a kind of an encapsulated environment, but they're not very flexible. When you see all the new technologies that are coming out, generative AI and analytics and such, the mainframe and the mid-range platforms tend to lag behind. And then if they actually come out with products, they're typically significantly more expensive than using these platforms on x86 platforms, the cloud and such. And so, all the new stuff is kind of, targeting more toward the new platforms. And that's becoming a business issue.
Like you're saying, Howard, is, the mainframe is lagging in some of those newer things. But then if you think about the AS400 and the mid-range, that's even a subset of the mainframe where it even lags further behind from that perspective. So there's lots of challenges, like you said, and we're seeing that in our clients, and the requests from our clients to actually do this has increased in the last 2 years, just like you're saying. The demand is there now.
Yeah. And, the next one, scarcity of mainframe skill sets, and particularly in the mid-ranges, it's even harder to find skill sets on the mid-range systems. And, one of the things I say, and I slightly careful with the comment, but, 15 years ago, these people were retiring and then being hired back as consultants, typically much more expensively. Well, now people are passing away. We're looking at, I was at a customer some years ago where 3 of the programmers on the floor were over the age of 70, and that's 15 years ago. So, these people are disappearing or, retiring and not unretiring. And so this is creating quite a bit of trauma too. And so again, with all these emerging platforms and stuff, it's much easier to find these new skill sets and or, train the people that you have that still have your mainframe skills and understand your business as well. Challenging or challenges in integrating into DevOps platforms. Yes, there's kind of DevOps for the mainframe, but it's a little unwieldy and or it's expensive because a lot of that processing takes place on the mainframe. So, the newer DevOps platforms are, with things like continuous integration and DevSecOps and things, agility to get your applications moving forward is just significantly better on these newer platforms. Then we talk again about the aging mainframe workforce, which I talked about. A little different than just the lack of skills, but again, the lack of skills is saying that these people aren't coming out of college typically anymore. So it's really, really hard to find skill sets, and the aging workforce complicates that as well. And then again, we find that a lot of mainframe shops and mainframe apps are not very agile. I was, some years back, I was in at one of the major State Department of Motor Vehicles, and the federal government had required that a veteran's flag be added to driver's licenses. And the place we were in literally said it would take them 17 months from start to finish to implement that. And while that sounds, a bit hard to believe, when you look at going through changing data models, the impacts on other applications, the way in which this development and testing is done, it certainly takes a lot longer than on the more modern platforms that we have today.
And that's a really good point, Howard, because somebody told me a while back and kind of put two pieces together. You get that skills scarcity and the technical debt that's put up. And they made a comment saying that even if you wanted to address the technical debt, you don't have enough people with the skills to address that technical debt. So hence you get 17 months, 2 years, those types of long processes to handle the business. And unfortunately, business climate is moving a lot faster than that these days. So it's causing that churn and that need to change.
The other thing I was thinking about as you were talking is that this is a different era of architecture of software, right? A lot of those are very large monolith systems, and you don't have to be in a mainframe to have a monolith system. There's always the challenge of the people who wrote it on around, and people don't want to touch and break parts of the system because you broke it, you bought it, you broke it, you fix it, and that could be a career-ending move itself. So it's also just you're right in the complexity, and sometimes it's just the sheer size of the applications.
Yeah, as Joe will talk about a little bit later, the one of the challenges is where do you start, to take this thing apart, and how, what are the approaches to do that? And Joel's got some great experience at that. So as we move on here, the other thing here is we talk about, mid-ranges are developing even more serious concerns because again, those platforms move more slowly. There's a lack of, skill sets. It's really hard to go find RPG programmers today on the open market. And, for the AS400, there's 4 different levels of RPG. And, so sometimes you get a guy who's used the old one and not seen the new one. And so then you have a problem. I was actually involved in a very large project some years ago where a customer had over 200 AS400 machines around the planet. And we were trying to figure out a way to modernize this. And how do you, we got to get the guy from China that knows RPG-3 to come to the US to work on the system there, right? And so it was quite fascinating trying to balance the skills that they had within there, but it was very clear that they just needed to get off of this platform, basically. And again, you have things like non-standard assembler code. One of the things that's been out in the open market is the California State Department of Motor Vehicles has tried multiple times to get vendors to modernize their systems, and they actually have some very old IBM Series 1 assembler code that was running under an emulator on an AIX platform. And this was public. This was put out in an RFP. I've watched 2 other vendors fail with it over the years because they go, wait a minute, you said it was assembler code. You didn't tell us it was Series 1 assembler code running under an emulator. We thought it was a mainframe. So, these types of things exist out there in the marketplace too and get very difficult. So again, one of the really important things, and one of the reasons we work really closely with Accenture, is it's critical when you do this that you have somebody that's been through this before, somebody who can help you before you jump in the swimming pool and start running into these things that can kind of help, create wave plans and determine, what needs to be lifted and shifted, what needs to be refactored, rewritten, replaced. That whole strategy, particularly when you work in larger enterprises, is just critical for success.
Yep, exactly.
And then we talk a little bit about, why companies still, are relying on mainframes and mid-range. There is a critical inflection point now. I've been in this market since the 1980s when at Micro Focus, we were just creating mainframe emulation products to allow people to just do testing off the development and testing, edit, compile, do some testing, throw it back to the mainframe. Well, what I'm seeing now is with the cloud, with the price increases, all these new technologies coming out that are incredibly disruptive, like again, generative AI, that there's a massive uptick again on people wanting to get off these platforms. And so, we're putting a huge investment into this, as is Accenture. One thing I'll invite you, we're having our reInvent conference in late November. and that's in Las Vegas. And you can also register for that remotely. But we're going to be making some significant announcements. We were already building out toward this, and I'll have one more slide I'll show you about this, but we're going to be making significant announcements in this space as well. And I would really invite, all the attendees that are interested to listen in on the keynote sessions at least. And there's going to be some kind of exciting stuff for all of us coming up.
And there'll be some breakout sessions specifically around mainframe and that type of stuff at re:Invent also. So.
Yeah, and absolutely. So this is what I wanted to do was I'm not going to talk in-depthly, get down in the weeds about all the, technologies and things. But one of the things I want to show you a little bit later here is that Amazon decided to invest in this marketplace, not just throw some cloud services out there and say, use our stuff. So we acquired arguably the best code transformation company, and there are several out there, and some are better than others depending on what they're working with. But we acquired BlueAge, and BlueAge has a really good track record of doing mainframe, COBOL, PL1. But additionally, we have built into it the ability now to do AS400 in particular, and actually some of the other mid-range platforms, and there'll be some announcements around that as well. But what we see here is kind of the cost of, when you attack one of these projects, way out at the high-end cost is rewriting, and there's a lot of failure in rewriting applications, very expensive. Those projects go off the rails a lot of times, and even the ones that get delivered, which typically is about 30%. The analysts will tell you about 70% of the rewrite projects fail, by the way, and are very costly. But even the 30% kind of, lack what users expected because they're trying to get this thing out. And so what we find is, from a cost standpoint and a reliability standpoint, looking at a refactor early on is using something like the BlueAge tool, or even we have other partners that have transformation products as well that run on our platform. So a lot of options out there for this. And, the other pattern is what we call lift and shift, or some people call it rehosting. That gets confused because that can also mean moving to mainframe to another mainframe. Replatforming is another term they use. But with tools like Micro Focus, and Amazon did a very specialized arrangement with Micro Focus where we can offer their PL1 COBOL mainframe emulation technology on our platform on a consumption-only basis. And that's really critical because you now don't have to have licenses and such. You can spin up these instances on Amazon and get at these tools and these emulators rapidly. And we're building out other services around this. So those are kind of two of the main patterns that we have.
One of the things I really like about this slide too, Howard, we did some research together with Techstrong Research and AWS and Accenture, and we have a PulseMeter document. And it's true, it isn't all rewrite. And we probably have all been part of one of those projects, and they are behemoths, and you often, most of the time, fail. But the refactoring, that actually was kind of the highest of the four options of re-architecting, refactoring, rewriting, and replatforming, lift and shift. The others were kind of about even of what approaches people were taking, but the refactoring was probably, yet again, another 50% more responded that way. So, you don't have to bite it all off at once, right? You can refactor parts of the application into cloud native or whatever approach you want to take. You don't have to do the whole thing.
Yeah, that brings up a really important point, which is there's a pattern where some people need to get off the mainframe quickly, or they really need to reduce costs quickly. And so they'll do a lift and shift first, say to Micro Focus. Let's get you off the mainframe, release all those costs. You'll start saving money, by just having a scale out consumption only type of architecture where you're only paying for what you're using when you're using it, which is not how the mainframe is. It's more of a scale up. I've got to have, the max number of capability there when I hit my, year end or month end stuff. So what's interesting is we have people that use that to create kind of self-funding projects where they want to modernize, they want to get to maybe Java or something, and they don't have the money to jump in and do all that quickly. So what they'll do is they'll do a lift and shift, get off the mainframe, get that stuff running, take the savings and then invest that into kind of a phase 2 modernization effort. And that's worked well for some clients as well. I do have to say, and I'll say this with a slight smirk on my face, that some of those projects that are planned, when they get to phase 1, they've got it off, they've got their COBOL running on Amazon Cloud and such, they kind of go, it's working and we're saving money. Do we really want to do that transformation project? And so you have to sometimes kind of nudge them, or they have to have this recycle around, like, we're losing the skills. Yes, we do need to do this, right?
And I think that's a key point, Howard, because one of the things that we see is it's really what the forward-looking direction is of the client and what they're ready to do. Like, for example, I'm working with one client that has a large group of COBOL programmers. And it's like, I can't turn those COBOL programmers into Java programmers overnight. And I have a very active code base. So, but I need to do those cost savings. I need to do that scale. I need to do that. And so with that team, we're actually doing a replatform going COBOL to COBOL over on AWS. But in that same company, there's another team that is very Java Pro, very forward-looking, and want to use cloud native applications. And so we're converting very similar modules into Java using BlueAge. And so I think it really depends on what that forward-looking direction is of that of the client and their needs, and from that. So the way we approach it is, it's not just one pattern. It's basically, what is the right pattern for that situation. And some of that is data augmentation, some of that is code migration, and it's really, and I'll talk about it later, that's part of the assessment that you need to do up front.
Yeah, and one thing, Joel, I don't want to put you on the spot because we can't disclose customers and stuff, but just for the audience here who think that, these are 10-man projects or something, can you name the number of programmers that are involved in these two teams approximately?
Yeah, I mean, there was about 1,500 programmers, if that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
they're working on COBOL, and different. They're basically around the world. There's some onshore, offshore, all that type of stuff. So, and that's a little hard to just say, okay, you're Java people now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so we've got some extremely large scale things going on. There are customers that are moving off the mainframe now that are in excess of 300,000 MIPS, by the way. So we're past those days of is it a 200 MIP mainframe or something? We're into all sizes, and that's where it gets really challenging to create the strategy for how you attack this, basically.
And that's a key piece, Howard, is a lot of the the small applications around the mainframe, they've already been moved, or they're already on their way, or been replaced, or something like that. We're now starting to get into the core applications. And so that's a big change that's happened, is that kimono's cracked. And now we're going into the core applications and moving them.
Right. Well, this slide here, I'm not going to talk through this slide, but I wanted this in the deck for those that are very interested in the AS400 environment, or I-Series as it's now called. But again, this is another BlueAge slide that the BlueAge team sent to me, and this is just kind of gives you an idea of how the BlueAge team deals with all the various components, because what's interesting is I hear a lot of people swear up and down that an AS400 is a mainframe. I hear this all the time, but it's a mid-range. But the thing is, it's different. About the only thing that's similar about the two is I think they're both EPSODIC machines, and
and this is why we're excited about what BlueAge brings to the table, and why we're getting our certifications. We're kind of leading the way with AWS, getting our certifications in BlueAge, is because it provides that end-to-end. Not only does it provide the mainframe, it also provides the AS400 conversion. So we really now have a one-stop of, hey, let's go use this tool no matter what your platform is.
Exactly. So I'm going to just talk for a moment, and I want Joel to talk. I've been talking too much here, but this talks a little bit about what Amazon has done and how we leverage and help Accenture, and they help us make this happen, basically. But as I said previously, in June of 2022, we acquired the BlueAge product. we did a special licensing deal with Micro Focus. Nobody else can offer Micro Focus on a consumption-only basis without licensing. So that was something that we did to begin to build out what we call our mainframe modernization service. More recently, we've announced Precisely, who used to be SyncSort, by the way. I like to mention that because I had a lot of respect for SyncSort. Precisely does data replication now. There's even another company, Model 9, that's doing data augmentation, things, move your tape libraries off, things like that. And, you know, a number of other things. And what's really good here for both AWS and Accenture is Accenture tends to become a launch partner early for anything that we're doing. So they're already working on a couple of really exciting programs that will be announced at the reInvent. We tend to, you know, look to Accenture to be kind of a first-time user and also an advisor to us. We had a fascinating call earlier with Joe on something coming out and him helping our team with real-time challenges at one of his clients. So we work really closely with Accenture to get this stuff out, get the expertise around it, and you know, make sure that things are meeting customers' needs. And then finally, I just want to make one last comment here about, you know, the other platforms, you know, Spark, Risk, Alpha, you know, there is Deck Alpha still out there, believe it or not, AIX, you know, so we have a very rich partner ecosystem also that Accenture works with. And we do things like, you know, if you have a data center that's going out of business, we can pick your data center up and move it somewhere else with these partners. There are cases where Amazon will come in and actually take over, acquire a customer's data center and give them a time out of that as we begin to slowly move things. So a lot of options here for how you create the journey based on, you know, what your circumstances are. And when we talk about the cost of doing nothing, that's one of the, we used to have these choices. Do I do refactoring? Do I migrate? Do I pay IBM more money? Cost of doing nothing. I call that, and I have to say I stole this from one of my friends in the industry, the Chernobyl effect. You know, we'll just pour more concrete on this mid-range or mainframe and hope nothing happens. And I don't have time today, but I have some great stories about where something did happen and it caused, you know, all kinds of chaos within companies because, you know, something happened to an old assembler program or something and, you know, overran a buffer or something and all hell broke loose on their production system.
Or need to change something.
Exactly. Yeah. So there we go. We don't have any assembler programmers. Can you do this for us?
Break through that concrete.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So with that, I really want to turn this over to Joel and go right ahead, Joel. So.
Well, thanks, Howard. And, you know, I think that was a good segue into, you know, we partner heavily with AWS on the mainframe modernization, and we partner very heavily with AWS in general. So over 15 years ago, we established a partnership with AWS and have really worked on moving many workloads. And within the last couple of years, we focused on mainframe modernization and really leveraging and working closely on the new things that AWS is offering. So certifications, you know, we have millions of people, like I said, as we're doing Blue Age certifications also. So a lot of activity and a lot of long history of working together with AWS and Accenture from there. And one of the things that we did as we worked together, a unique challenge is, and I think we said it earlier, that people have been trying to modernize mainframes and mid-ranges for many, many years. This is probably, and I know Howard's also, this is the fourth or so iteration of trying to get off the mainframe or do something with that. And so the pure modernization thing works, but it's usually a 30 or 40 or 50-year program. And so what we did is we looked at, hey, some of these new tools like the mainframe modernization service, you don't have to do one thing. You can do two things, because a lot what AWS brought to the table is a way to accelerate that cost relief, a way to accelerate those things that align with your existing modernization approach. And so that's really what we've done. We've really keyed it as mainframe cloudification. And it's really, how do we cloudify that mainframe, accelerate that journey from there? and we're doing this at a number of clients right now, and exactly leads into what you said, Howard, about how can I use that cost savings then to accelerate my other modernization journeys, and from there. So a lot of activity. We've been really successful doing this at other clients. Happy to talk more about it to anybody who's interested. But let's talk a little bit about that journey, because what people talk about is, hey, this mainframe is a big monolith. I don't want to touch it. I want to pour concrete on it and not really touch it anymore. But the first thing you want to do is we have a very systematic approach about going across that mainframe and looking at it. And what I mean by that is, that mainframe has been sitting there for the last 30 or 40 years. The applications are very intertwined with the database, very intertwined with the file system, very intertwined everywhere. So how do I start pulling that monolith apart? So that's one of the things that we've really worked at Accenture, is working with the AWS tools, working with that. How do we start building those islands, those bridges, and understand, this can go first, but I need to have this bridge back to make sure I have business continuity. And from that. So we do that in a couple stages. One is discovery. What I mean by discovery is, what we find at most clients, it usually takes about 6-7 weeks just to get the source code together, to get it all in one place so we can actually analyze it and take a look at it. So there's a lot of discovery activities, like how many MIPS do you use? Do you use CA7? Do you use DB2 or IMSDB? What do you use? So there's a lot of discovery that we do at the beginning. Once we've discovered that, the next stage is really assess it. Let's go through and figure out what are those islands and bridges between the different components. What can I pull out? Like, for example, this one client, we're pulling out one of the core transactions, but it touches like 23 different applications. And so we have to be very careful. We can pull this table, but not take the table. We need to leave that table there. We need this VSAM and those types of things. So we have a methodology using a lot of the tools that AWS provides to be able to figure out how that puzzle pieces go together. So we can just pull this one out without the whole thing pulling down from there. And then the next stage is really one of the things we see with a lot of clients. Like I said, this isn't the first time that they've tried mainframe modernization. So there's a lot of skepticism. Mm-hmm. And so one of the first things that they want to say is, that's great, that's wonderful. I love your islands, bridges, prove it. Prove that it works. And so what we see is a pilot. And what I mean by a pilot versus a POC, pilot is, let's take an application, let's take something, and let's go through the conversion, and let's go to production with it. Let's actually show that it relieves and it scales and does what it needs to do. And then once we prove that point, then you start rolling it out. So that's kind of a quick 2-minute overview of our process and procedures and from that, and how we approach these things.
Super.
So the next question we get is, hey, that's wonderful, that's great, but does this really save me money? Does this really provide value? And from that perspective, well, I can tell, we've proven at a number of clients, yes, it does. As a matter of fact, that one client I'm working on right now, just on the infrastructure side, once we got to that pilot, we could actually empirically show that it was 60% cheaper to run on AWS than it is on the mainframe from an infrastructure point of view. Because what we did is we looked at the throughput of required, and it actually had the logic running that was doing the same transactions. And we look at the throughput and the latency, and the cost basis for that on AWS is 60% cheaper than what I was paying for the equivalent on the mainframe. So yes, it is very much cheaper to go do it on AWS. And one of the things that we do is, again, just like we have a methodology of moving through the different stages to get it over, we also have a methodology. How do we go in and find your IBM contracts? How do we go and find all your costs with your mainframe? Because a lot of times people just look at the MIPS cost. That's one piece of the cost. So one of the things we do is look at that holistic view of the business case and provide you that business case from that.
Yeah, and if I may, I've seen that, a lot of times people approach this as, where's the low-hanging fruit, right? Which application is easiest to get off? things, but we've been in the clients, particularly, this is where I've been very, very impressed with the Accenture team. We've been in the clients where we lay out the whole financial model, right? We had one in particular that's got multiple mainframes, very large, 150,000 MIP client. And when we laid out all the finances, when are the upgrades, the licensing costs, the MIPS charges if you go over a certain thing, we found that one mainframe out of the bunch in particularly was the most beneficial to take out from a financial standpoint. And so we targeted that mainframe and then went look, okay, now how does that impact the rest of the real estate here? And Accenture built a wave plan based on that. And that was extremely impressive. And it also made it I wouldn't say extremely easy, but it made it very palatable for the board of directors of that company to look at it, because now we were looking at it from, a very strong financial business case that made sense technically as well as we aligned to that. So.
And that's an important point, Howard, because when you think about the mainframe, you don't see results in a year. You want to see, but if we can come up with a plan to show results as soon as possible, you don't have to wait 5 years to see the results. Okay. So, because one of the things that, has been a challenge with mainframes over the years is it takes a while to get the return on investment, but the return on investment is huge from that perspective. But a lot of people get scared because it might take a year or two to see that return on investment.
Yep.
From there.
Exactly.
So it's exactly what you said, is how do we optimize not only the journey to the AWS, but how do we optimize the value created during that journey? Exactly. So that's something that we very much specialize in.
Yep.
So the last piece I really want to talk about with the overall strategy is testing. That's a key part of any mainframe or mid-range modernization, because think about it. Where are your business rules? How do your transactions actually work? There's only one place where that's documented. It's in the code. It actually works this way. And so one of the first things you want to do, different than a lot of other migrations, that kind of stuff, is we need to prove functional equivalency. We need to prove that it worked this way over here, now it works this way over here. So one of the things that we did, really working on a lot of projects with AWS, is really crystallize that testing strategy of how we go about with the mainframe to do data equivalency, to do functional equivalency, to do performance. Because one of the things you don't want to have happen is I had sub-second transactions on the mainframe, and all of a sudden now it's 3 or 4 seconds. So lots of strategies to go do that, but you need to pay attention to it. And so we have a very clear methodology, and one of the things we highly specialize in is how do we get that functional equivalency, and how do we make sure that you feel comfortable going to production with those applications from there. So that's kind of net is, if you think about it, there's the 3 pieces of the strategy. One is getting the applications off, getting those converted over through either refactor or replatform. The business case, making sure you get that value as soon as you can. And then the last and a very important piece is that testing strategy, making sure what we got over there is what you need and how it works today from there. So, and then just a few use cases. So how we work together with AWS, we've worked in a lot of different modes. One is side by side, where what we did is AWS had a contract, Accenture had a contract. The clients asked us to do very similar things in parallel, and we just worked really close together around that. We've also worked as a joint team, which is really we basically rely upon each other. We're dependent upon each other. We have individual tasks. AWS focuses a lot on the infrastructure and some of the conversion. We focus on testing and a lot of the data and other pieces. And so we really work as one team. And from that perspective. And then the last way we really worked together is the client didn't really know what they wanted to do. So we both came in and really act as an advisor or a guide on, hey, you should do this. In this particular case, it's like, well, don't modernize the mainframe. Most of your mainframe functions are ERP. You're already on your journey to SAP. accelerate your journey to SAP instead of moving the code off the mainframe and then moving it to SAP. Accelerate your journey. Then what's left, we'll figure out what to do with from there. So it's really that guide of being able to show the way. So that's kind of it. I'll give it back to you, Mitch, and wrap us up. And
Great. We're going to head to our Q&A session with the audience. If it's okay, I want to ask you a couple questions because I wanted to let you get through your presentation and talking about how this works. I'm thinking about something you said, Howard, of the do nothing strategy, which is sounds like the easiest. Sometimes do nothing is because of momentum that it's hard to swing it away to another strategy. But there's also sort of a paralyzing effect that can happen. I just don't know what to do. There's so many options, and I don't know which. They all look like they could fail, and I don't want to be the person that's going to fail. I'm curious, when you run in, I assume you run into that kind of situation. We thought about it, but we just not quite sure what to do. How do you get over that hump of, okay, here's how we're going to figure that out with you, and it may be kind of stronger in your court, Joel, with your methodology, but I have to imagine that's a big question you have to answer a lot.
Yeah, Joel, you want to jump?
Yeah, I can jump in. That is a question, and as a matter of fact, I mean, history shows. I think why this is like the third, fourth iteration trying to get off the mainframe is exactly that reason, Mitch. Is what I've always seen is it's been a high priority to get off the mainframe, but it never ends up being number one because of the risk. And the risk is basically, they could all fail. We might not. I heard bad stories and that kind of stuff. But some of the things that Howard said early on, the market is changing where, the skills just aren't there. The tech debt is growing, and the agility that is required to really stay relevant in this business world is accelerating. And so I think the issue that we're seeing is where it used to be that I never worried about the mainframe. It always deployed, it always worked, we're seeing clients that are having problems where somebody not quite skilled or doesn't have that knowledge deploys something, and all of a sudden it corrupts the database on the mainframe. And so we're starting to see those cracks. So that really gets back into do nothing, and you're going to have more of those. And you're going to create an unstable platform where you used to have a very stable platform. And so I think that's one of the risks of doing nothing right now is you're going to create your unstable environment.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories is I was working at a very large, one of the world's largest property tax entities, a public sector. And I came in one morning, and the IBM team was lined up at my cubicle, and the customer was lined up at the cubicle. And this is many years ago. I was with Microsoft, and as I came in, they said, "Howard, you're a mainframer. Do you know assembler code?" And I kind of went, "Well, yeah, 20 years ago. What's up?" "Well, we have to get property tax bills out within a 3-day window by law, and the system blew up last night. It's never blown up. And it looks like it's an assembler module. And our last assembler programmer left 5 years ago. And the IBM team, they're all young guys. They don't know assembler. And, can you help us?" So what I did, literally, this sounds bizarre, but I had a friend who was retired living on the island of Bonaire in the Caribbean, who's a world-class assembler programmer. And I said, "Would you mind if I sent it to Bonaire to this guy?" They're like, anything. So I sent this. I asked them first, I said, "Do you have any documentation?" And the lady turns around, opens the file cabinet, pulls out a college-ruled piece of paper in ink dated 1978. And I'm not exaggerating. So I sent this down to my friend. He looked at it for 2 hours. We had to get a dump and stuff. And we had to teach them how to do a dump too. So anyway, he calls back. He says, "This is fascinating." He says, "This is a tax system. And so every year the master VSAM file gets the tax history appended to it. It's a variable length file. And they defined an 8K buffer back in 1978. So guess what happened?"
Hit the max.
So, and the hilarious thing was, he said, "So what I've done is I've changed the buffer from 8K to 32K. That'll last them a millennium." And by the way, this thing was running in 24-bit mode, and that
Yeah.
kills your performance. I made it 32-bit. So this is the kind of things that could be laying there when they're going, our mainframe's solid, solid as a rock, and this stuff works fine. But
and I think also to follow up on one thing you said, Mitch, is where do you start? Somebody has all these options. Where do you start? I would say the first thing to do is call Accenture, call AWS, or call us both. Because one of the things that we do is we're good at coming in, having a conversation, and happy to do that, happy to have a conversation. And, part of the discovery process and that kind of stuff, there's some simple questionnaires. AWS has something called an MRA that really kind of gives you that 100,000 foot level. We have a very quick way to get a business case, number of MIPS, number of things, and how much is that potential savings? Obviously it's a back in a napkin calculation, not something that I'll take to the bank, but it gives you that order of magnitude that, hey, you could save 50 million a year. Hey, you could, and here's how you can get started. So I'd say give us a call. I'm happy to have those conversations and start you down that journey.
Excellent. Hey, I want to encourage folks to enter your questions in the chat, and we'll get to them. I'm going to ask one more question of you both. Just my own experience is you don't really realize what it's like to move to a consumption-based model until you're there. Mm-hmm. It's we're very accustomed to a sort of a fixed asset, like you were describing earlier, Joel. Like I think Howard said, you need the maximum of what you're going to hit at a year end or whatever your peak period is. What are some of the surprises or learnings that once you help customers get into that environment, they say, aha, I get it. It's more than just somebody else's computer. There's some changes of how we can do things or think about solving problems. Howard, do you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you just kind of look at what goes away, not just, your mainframe, all the, the local peripherals, the data center, your electricity, your air conditioning, all of the operations around that gets shifted over to Amazon and, with Accenture if they're managing things as well. So, you can focus on your applications, if that makes sense. You can focus on your business needs and, not worry about those things. One of the things that I'm a big proponent of is a lot of shops have these long running batch jobs where something may run for hours at a night. And in some cases, we can come in and very easily parallelize those, meaning that we can make small changes to those applications and you can suddenly spin up 100 instances of the same application running in parallel, all accessing maybe different parts of the input data file or something. Mm-hmm. And so I've taken things that in fact, the most extreme case, something that took a company entire week to run because they had to run one every night because of the size of their input files, and get that down to 6 hours, for example. And, there you begin to, take the batch window down. You can then begin to kind of change the business as well. We don't have to wait until the weekend to rerun something if it blows up, so you can like expand out and suddenly run those 100 instances for, 10 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, blast something through and then spin it back down, and you're not paying for all that. So that's something that, and mainframers often don't think in those ways because they're not allowed to run 100 batch regions. There are file sharing issues on the mainframe that don't exist on the new platforms, by the way, as well. So, architecturally, you can go in and really make some difference with a little bit of architectural work on the existing apps in some cases.
Very cool. Joel, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can add on to what Howard said. And I think that's a very intriguing question, Mitch, because when people ask me, well, what's different about the cloud versus anything else? You hit the nail on the head, which is it's the consumption model. And the reason I say this, a consumption model, what do you used to have to do, or what do you still do in a lot of cases, especially with mainframes, is I have to do capacity planning. I have to, so before I start a new project, what do I need to do? In the old days, what do I need to do is I need to come up with a budget. I need to sit down and at least 6 to 8 weeks to come up with a business case. Then I need to go to procurement because I need to acquire the hardware. And then I have all these servers that arrive. Wonderful. And I start my project and I get about 2 months into the project. And what happens? Oh, I missed. Now I have this $2 million worth of hardware sitting here. What do I do with it?
Yeah.
And so people don't want to say, hey, let's just give it up and throw it back. It's like, well, let's keep going.
Yeah.
And so why in that model is a whole different model in the consumption world. Because in consumption world I could spend a couple of weeks coming up with a business case, go try something. If it doesn't work, I shut down the instances and I don't pay for them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because what does that create? That creates innovation. That creates things at a faster speed and you're willing to take more risks and that kind of stuff. And that's really, I think, what we're trying to unlock with the mainframe.
Yeah.
Because the mainframe's kind of that capacity planning on steroids.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, what Howard said earlier about Micro Focus as a consumption model, and a lot of things as a consumption model, how do we turn that capacity planning on steroids into a consumption model and actually unlock that innovation that's already there and is asking to be creative, but because of the processes and the mechanisms and the capital expenses that we have in the past, we can't do. So I think it's a very intriguing question because that's one thing I think has really separated the cloud from past things and past, because I've always had run my data center somewhere else, but that whole consumption model has really kind of changed the model and unlocked innovation.
And even with if I could jump in the scenario I was talking about earlier where the property tax billing system blew up. Well, once we fixed it, they were sharing their mainframe with other agencies. So they had to call the CIO, call other CIOs and go, we need this special run tonight. Could you not run your stuff so that we can get our run in because the mainframe couldn't do it, right? And that happens interdepartments in companies as well sometimes, right? Could you guys hold your stuff off because we need some extra power, right?
Or the worst thing is you don't want to be the last person standing on the mainframe.
Yes.
Because you cover all the costs now.
Yeah, you're getting all that cost. You touched on something really interesting. We could do a whole webinar just on this. The decrease in cycle time because you're not waiting for hardware or gear or whatever to show up. We're going to go do it this afternoon, right?
Yeah.
Let's go run a test, an experiment, or put it in production. And literally in minutes, hours, a few days, you can do something that took weeks or months to do because you had to prep for the whole thing. So, we've got.
If you look again, last thing, but generative AI. Yeah. What's this generative AI thing? We'd like to play with that, but my goodness, am I going to double my mainframe capacity?
Yeah, I heard it takes a lot of storage or a lot of compute or special CPUs or GPUs.
Well, it takes a lot of compute at one time and then it goes away.
Yeah.
So you're going to buy that big HPC box?
Yeah. So
really good point. Well, we've got some great questions queued up. So let's turn it over to some Q&A time. So we'll do that right now.
Perfect. Super. Thanks.
One of our participants asked about AS400s in particular, but how do you make that case? It probably falls into your court, at least first, Joel, of how you put that kind of business case, make the case, if you will, for modernization.
I think that's a great question. I kind of did a preliminary answer in there about business agility and risk management for AS400, but I think it's an overall thing because business case for mainframe or midrange or AS400 is always a challenge because the return on investment isn't immediate, and so you need to figure out what is that long-term investment because the bubble's a little higher to do that move. And so the benefit is there. So one of the things that we really focus on is obviously with the ZOS, you can see really good benefit from the cost operation and that kind of stuff. AS400, more challenging because the costs are a lot lower from that. But if you think about it, everything we talked about with, being able to handle the tech debt with the skills gap and from that, it's really about risk management and how agile you can be. Because, for example, if it takes me 3 years to change that application, I'm not moving at the pace that the business needs to move. from there. So it's really what we have done with our business cases, we actually identify the intangibles of, what is that missed revenue opportunity? What is those types of things, and really highlighting that in the business case. So it goes beyond more than just dollars and cents of what my IT budget is. And that's why it's important, as part of this, we get the business engaged in this journey and not just make it an IT exercise.
Anything to add to that, Howard?
No, I think that's good. I mean, the AS400's, always been a challenge because there aren't a lot of tools vendors that have built products to do automated migrations and such. And so a lot of that's been kind of piecemeal, taking apps over and either replacing them with COTS or refactoring them, or, but not all the other pieces, So, we're moving now where we have, Blue Age is moving more toward, having a complete solution. There are a couple other vendors that have such as well. So, there is some investment that we've been making into this space to try to make that journey easier, if that makes sense. One quick comment I'll make, we're about out of time, but when I moved from Indiana to San Antonio, I had an AS400 in my basement, and I didn't know what to do with it. So I took it to Goodwill in Bloomington, Indiana, and I was just wondering if somebody would walk in and go, how in the world did an AS400 get to Goodwill? But go ahead.
Ring network and all, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, hey, Cody has showed up. That means there's some money to give away here, so we better get to Cody.
That's
right.
Awesome. Well, Mitch, Howard, and Joel, thank you so much for joining us today. It's such a pleasure to learn from you over this past hour and to hear all of your expertise and insights. So thank you so much for joining us on Techstrong Learning. I'd like to remind our audience at this point that we have recorded our session. So you will be receiving that recording over email, but you can also find this living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and be sure to look in the on-demand section. As Mitch mentioned, we do have 2 $25 Amazon gift cards to give away, and our winners are Ashwini C. and Marcus K. So to the both of you, keep an eye out for an email from myself. I'll be sending it out here shortly. If you don't happen to find an email from me, check your spam folder just in case. You don't want to miss out on that free gift card. So I'd like to thank AWS and Accenture for sponsoring our program. I'd like to give a shout out to Techstrong Research for helping us put together the PulseMeter report for today. Feel free to grab that report in the handout section. And to everyone here, thank you so much for attending. We appreciate your time, and there is a quick survey that's attached to the top of the chat. If you'll take just 1 minute to fill that out for us, we'd really appreciate it. Otherwise, we do hope to see everyone at a future Techstrong Learning experience. Have a great rest of your day, and you may now disconnect, everyone. Thanks again, Howard, Joel, and Mitch.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.